Namaste. Thought, affect, and behavior constitute the holy trinity of psychotherapy. Behavior is the most explicit and observable element of the trinity. Imagine a child who is incentivized to his homework by giving him a chocolate once he completes his homework. The rewarding of the child to influence his behavior is a classical example of using behavior to induce change in the person. Ironically, action speaks louder than words. However, unspoken words often lead to action. Psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and spirituality engage with behavior in different ways. To discuss the subject of behavior in psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and spirituality, we have with us psychoanalysis consultant Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start with the holy trinity of psychotherapy and discover there the evolution of behavior in significance?
Um, Thought, affect, and behavior constitute the holy trinity of psychotherapy. Behavior of the three has a very interesting history in terms of evolution. In ancient times, we do find the significance of behavior in the area of psychological health, where we find mention of behavioral therapy oriented institutes for
Mhm.
psychological healing in ancient times in the East, and in some cases even in the um, area near Greece and some parts of Egypt and some parts of Middle East.
Mhm.
However, after the advent of uh, Christianity and after the initial phase was over, the dark age for mental health started, where we started looking, not we, but the sort of medieval age Europe started looking at mental health and patients of mental health as people who were condemned and possessed. And that brought in a completely different flavor and a tragedy to mental health, where people were chained in asylums, and those images are still fresh in our minds today. And therefore, during that period, thought, affect, behavior, by and large, all the three went out of the window in terms of Europe.
Mhm.
However, in the East, the use of behavior, thought, and affect, all the three continued across the whole of history. It is just that we don't know enough about the history of mental health institutions and the profession of mental health in the East.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But it continued, thought, affect, and behavior, all the three continued to be used for psychological health in the East, and particularly in India and Tibet. In the middle of last century, we had a revival of sorts of significance of behavior. And this started towards the middle of last century. And this started primarily out of a need to make psychology and psychotherapy more scientific. And the idea was that thought and affect are very esoteric, very ephemeral, very abstract, very non-concrete, and open to controversy and conceptual fights. Whereas, if we take behavior as a unit of analysis, then behavior is very concrete to observe, very objective to observe, can be easily measured, and therefore open to experimentation on the laboratory scale. And this led people like Skinner and a few others,
Paulo.
Pavlov, Skinner, and a few others, to really explore behavior as being more significant than thought and affect in the working of human mind, and also for healing in psychotherapy. And that brought about a new wave of behavior being more significant than thought and affect. However, that wave was short-lived. And very soon people realized that it is not easy to heal deep-seated problems by going in the reverse way. That through behavior, how much can we impact upon deep-seated emotions and deep-seated thought schemas, that increasingly became clear it was not easy. On the other hand, those who were practicing behavioral therapy became absolutely fanatic, and they started looking down upon everyone else. The result was a kind of an isolation of the whole area of behavior, and a kind of a counter reaction, where again we moved more towards thought and affect, and we did not even give the due significance to behavior. And this continued from about the end of last 2 decades of the last century, and it continues even today. However, there were other offshoots which were more synthetic in nature, which were not so fanatic on the laboratory science aspect of behavior. And these approaches, they continued to use behavior to study human behavior, change human behavior, and heal psychological problems. Psychodrama is one such offshoot which combines thought, affect, and behavior, and uses behavior in a much larger proportion out of the three in order to bring about certain changes. And it uses behavior in a very artistic way by providing it a particular environment. So it is a kind of a designed behavioral intervention. It is not a behavioral intervention of default where you say go to that place and see what happens. You actually design that space into which the person has to go. So it's a designed behavioral experience.
Right.
On the other hand, while psychodrama was coming up in the West and art therapy was coming up in the West, in the East and in the tribal regions, you always had a very strong tradition of shamanic healing as well as of mystical healings, which used thought, affect, and behavior all together. And in some of their practices, behavior was the more significant component rather than the other two. So the leveraging of behavior continued in the shamanic practices and in the East, even as in the West, there was this rise, decline, complete abandonment, then a fanatic rise to the top, and again sidelining by the mainstream psychotherapy. While these kind of tumultuous events were going on in the West, in the East, in the tribal regions, in the more naturally grounded cultures, the use of all the three in a holistic way continued. In some practices, thought was predominant, in some affect was predominant, in some behavior was predominant, in some they were comparable. All permutations and combinations were used scientifically, artistically, mystically, spiritually, religiously. In various contexts, they were used. And this use of behavior, with its due respect and significance and leveraging, continued in the shamanic practices of the tribal regions, of the Amazon, of Africa, of much of the East, and in India and Tibet, of course, also in China and Japan, very creatively in Korea, which has a very vibrant shamanic tradition.
Uh-huh.
In India, apart from all these usages, there was a very large area of using behavior with a flavor of mysticism and spirituality. So this is how the whole thing evolved, and I think the only time it found balance in the West was in the era of CBT, where the C and the B both were given some sort of comparable weightage, although the feeling or the affect was still left out.
Right.
So that was the most balanced situation one sees in the Western psychotherapy in terms of thought, affect, and behavior. And today, we see behavior being used far more in the non-mainstream psychotherapy, what we call usually the holistic healing, than in the mainstream psychotherapy. And I think this needs a change where we uh, re-give the respect due and we extract the profit that we can from leveraging behavior.
Right. So, Mr. Vedya, this brings us to our next question for the discussion. Do you think we have not integrated behavior enough in more popular cognitive and effective approaches?
True, true. Um, the first difficulty has been that behavior has been seen as more of a consequence of thought and affect, and
Hmm.
therefore of a lesser importance and not at the same stature as thought and affect. So this
True.
uh, way of thinking that sort of degrades the unit of behavior, that elemental, into a lesser uh, derived consequential sort of a variable. So it loses its aristocratic respect in that sense.
Somewhere it is taken as that this plus this leads to this. So let's
Yeah.
amend these two first. The output would be different. So
Yes.
behavior is taken somewhere as an output.
Yeah. So the whole
Right.
idea has been that if cause leads to effect, work with the cause, effect will happen itself.
Hmm. Right, right.
That has been the kind of broad thinking. The
Hmm.
reverse traffic has not been appreciated.
True.
In fact, if we look in the mind, the way the mind operates, you have a three-way traffic: thought leading
Hmm.
to affect, affect leading to
Hmm.
thought leading to
Hmm.
behavior, behavior leading to thought, affect leading to
Hmm.
behavior, behavior leading to affect. It's actually a three-way
Okay.
traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, everyone takes a phonetic position. So those in CBT and CT, they take a phonetic position that thought leads to feeling leads to behavior. You cannot have affect leading to thought leading to behavior, or behavior leading to affect leading to thought. That kind of thing is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we have a similar fanaticism in the depth psychology. So psychoanalysis would believe that it is the affect which leads to thought leads to action,
Hmm.
or it is the affect which leads to action leads to thought. But it would not believe
Hmm.
what cognitive behavioral therapy says, that always it is the TFB, thought leading to feeling
Yeah.
leading to action.
Any- yeah.
So that is one area where that kind of fanaticism and that kind of separation of the three is one thing where we have not leveraged behavior enough. Second, uh, we have also not fused behavior with thought and affect enough. Some part has been
Hmm.
done in CBT, but apart from CBT, if you look at other forms of psychotherapy, they are usually either heavy in thought or affect or behavior. You don't see behavior adequately used by those therapies which are heavy in thought or affect.
Right.
And third, uh, we never looked at the simple wisdom that the proof of pudding is in the eating. That if you induce a change in thought or feeling, it should ultimately
Hmm.
manifest as a change in behavior in everyday life.
Right.
So unless the everyday life behavior changes, how do we assure ourselves that change has been instituted?
Right.
So those elements have been left out, and we'll discuss more about it when we look at how psychoanalysis has not used behavior. But broadly, the idea has been that uh, the human organism is far too complex to go from behavior to thought and feeling, and deep-seated issues cannot be tackled this way. And in this thinking, what we miss out is what behavior can do uh, in terms of its uh, three strong points. First, the concreteness. Behavioral approaches can be very concrete, like you have in psychodrama, or you can ask a person who is afraid of crowds to really take that person into a crowd, or stand 50 meters away from the crowd and see what happens, and go 10 meters near and see what happens. So the concreteness of experience that behavior brings about is very precious, which we have not appreciated. The
Hmm.
second is simplicity, that even a person who is not able to go into the intricacies of thought and feelings does understand behavior. It's easy to understand. And third is designing behavioral experiments, because behavior is something which can be done in many ways. One, you can ask somebody to do it his way, or you can create an atmosphere in the laboratory, and in the laboratory you can do something, or you can take the person into the field and do something. So you have those laboratory behavioral measures. You have those uh, left to the person behavioral measures, and you have those field behavioral measures. And this provides us with a very rich canvas on which we can use our creativity to design hundreds of behavioral settings.
Right.
And this we have not adequately appreciated and made use of.
Mr. Vaidya, when we talk about conscious and unconscious, somewhere behavior seems to be more of a conscious thing, right? As a layman, when we stand out, we see that it is very much conditioned, whereas in thoughts, there is no limit. One can imagine and do a lot of things, which out of social, cultural, or morality or conditioning, a person would not act upon. Coming back to the same school of psychoanalysis, how does psychoanalysis look at behavior where unconscious and conscious are both much talked about?
Behavior has been repressed into the unconscious of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis just does not want to appreciate the significance of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And that has certain reasons. One, psychoanalysis essentially is based upon change which is brought about by insight and catharsis.
Mm.
And this insight and catharsis happens in a setting which is called the frame. The frame where there is a couch, there is a person, there is a therapist, analyst. There is this frame of fixed session, fixed timings of starting and ending, the anonymity of the
True.
therapist and the whole thing that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is if you accept the utility of behavioral experiments, this frame will get in question. Because if you design experiments, if you design behavioral settings, whether it is psychodrama or whether it is a real life experience, whatever be the situation, the moment you
Right.
become creative in creating settings into which the patient has to go, you open up a huge creative artistic canvas, where the setting can take up any form, and the whole concept of psychoanalytic frame that gets into question. And psychoanalysis is precariously fragile on this point. Any psychoanalyst who has tried to change the frame or deviate from it has been sidelined to the margins. We can think of Carl Jung, we can think of Lacan, and now we can think of Dawan Lo. Anyone who sort of plays with the frame gets marginalized. This seems to be sort of a trigger point or a breakdown point for psychoanalysis. Secondly,
rather it is the behavioral part, the people who are just, not fitting into the frame, they are kept aside.
So this, so for psychoanalysis, the whole behavior has been repressed into the unconscious. The first reason I said was, if you don't, then the frame gets questioned, and the frame may get broken. That is one paranoid prospect for psychoanalysis. Second is the significance of change through insight and catharsis, which is largely observational intellectual activity. Psychoanalysis does not do catharsis by using behavior. It does not get insight by using behavior. It largely uses pre-associations and dreams. This prospect that through behavior you can know the unconscious is terrifying for psychoanalysis. So the classical thinking has been, behavior is conscious, we are dealing with unconscious, nothing to do with it.
Right.
The roots are in the unconscious, change the root, the tree will change. That's the classical thinking. But the contrary thinking, which is rare, most people don't even know about it in psychoanalysis, is that it is possible to access the unconscious. It is possible even to induce catharsis and empty the unconscious in affective terms. It is possible to access some of the unconscious schemas through behavior. Now, this comes as a shock for people who are invested in a traditional way in psychoanalysis. They won't even know, even if they know, they won't accept. But if you look at some of the individual practices as well as group practices which are put forward by Osho or many thinkers and mystics in the East, you can see that through the action, through particular behavior, which initially is conscious, one enters into the unconscious and everything comes up. And that's a behavioral route to the unconscious, not only to know it, but also to empty it. This again is at odds with the insight-oriented working of psychoanalysis. For them, except for free association and dreams, the therapist hardly works with anything else for uncovering the unconscious idea and for catharsis. So this is the second difficulty. The third difficulty when you look at psychoanalysis and behavior is, psychoanalysis does not use behavior for self-work between sessions, either to convert insights into action or to consolidate upon what has been achieved in the session. And this is a long-standing difficulty, that many of the insights generated in the session just go waste. And after 10 sessions, again, the same insight comes up, and between these two sessions, the insight has never been converted into any action. Similarly, things are left halfway, they are never consolidated to become the new normal. and then they evaporate again and we are back to square one.
Right.
So this
True.
using of behavior to convert insight into action or to consolidate action that has once started in real life outside of the therapy session is never really used in psychoanalysis, which it should be.
Mm.
This was okay when we were having classical psychoanalysis, when we had 4 to 5 days a week and the person used to be every day with you.
Right.
So you could always tell the person ki why you are not converting this idea into action, or what are the problems on the road, let us look at it. Today, when the time constraints are too high and we are having people doing only 1 session per week or 2 sessions per week, there is considerable gap between sessions and the situation is no longer what it used to be.
Mm.
And the situation is no longer what it used to be, and therefore uh, the use of behavior for self-work, for converting insights into action and consolidating upon the action so that a new normal is very strongly established,
Right.
that has not been used by psychoanalysis. So for psychoanalysis, uh, I think one of the uh, many changes that are required in psychoanalysis, one of the elements is this: how in the next 5 to 10 years can we integrate behavior into the psychoanalytic psychotherapy?
As we started off with the discussion today, you have talked about different cultures and how ancient world people were very much aware about the significance of behavior in certain parts of the world. Now, how does Indian spirituality look at using behavior for healing of self or development?
In many ways. The first is as the uh, proof of attainment.
Hmm.
So for Indian spirituality, the proof of pudding is in the eating, and the eating
Hmm.
here is action. So if you have been
Hmm.
working on your thought and feelings, ultimately it has to come down to action. And Indian
Hmm.
spirituality has this idea of ethics and spirituality, which says there should be alignment between thought, word, and action.
Yes.
If you think something, if you speak something, and if you do the third thing, that is not spiritual at all.
True.
And therefore, whatever insights are generated, cognitive or affective, whatever catharsis happens or does not happen, ultimately, it has to result in a sustained healthy change in action. Secondly, this whole idea of personal life and professional life being separated by a stone wall is a very Western idea. This whole concept of privacy is a Western idea.
Okay.
The Indian concept actually is of integration and transparency.
Yeah, that reminds me of that Kathni Karni ki Samanta.
Yes.
That's given a lot of significance there.
So in India, nobody will claim that person X is respectable because he is good in his profession, does not matter
Hmm.
what he is in his personal life.
Right.
Now, separating the professional and the personal is very common in the West. It is not an Indian idea at all. The whole
Right.
concept of privacy also is a Western idea. The Indian idea is based upon transparency. So the Indian idea essentially is one of transparency and integration of the public and the private. And in both the domains, one has to be able to see in practice, in behavior, all that the person says, professes, or tries to attain. So the first use of behavior that Indian spirituality does is to sort of use it as a confirmatory variable to verify whether attainment which has been claimed has truly been made or not. It is a sort of a
Hmm.
proof of the concept.
Right.
One. Second, in terms of personal change, Indian spirituality puts a lot of emphasis on using behavior in terms of sattvic work. And
Mm-hmm.
this sattvic work, or we can uh, roughly translate this into uh, enlightened work, or even more loosely into good work or social work. So if we do that kind of rough translation, the idea there is you can use behavior which is towards a good end, which is not rooted in ordinary desires. That work itself is a purifying activity and helps you to purify yourself and change yourself. So if you do selfless work, then the self-centered parts of yourself over a period of time undergo a change. It's an outside-in therapy.
Right, right.
That the behavior leads to a change in thoughts and feelings. And you develop new feelings which try to draw some relish or enjoyment from good work which previously was not there.
Hmm.
So you start enjoying the good. So previously there was a dichotomy between the enjoyable and the good. And slowly you want them to be one. So that is the second use of behavior in Indian spirituality in terms of the enlightened work or social work or good work. The
Okay.
third element is using behavior in more mystical and spiritual aspects. This takes us to use of techniques like Avishka, which is a Indian version of psychodrama. But if it's an Indian version, it cannot be without spirits and God. So it's an Indian
True.
version of psychodrama with the concept of spirits and gods and reincarnation.
Right, right.
This is also a very creative and very powerful use of behavior for self-change, self-development, and expanding the range of one's experiences. Then we have certain behavioral practices prescribed as a part of idol therapy, which people wrongly
Hmm.
call idol worship. It's actually idol therapy. And
Right.
as a part of certain alchemical exercises, where along with the visualization, mantra, some rituals and chanting of certain things and certain yoga practices, certain behavioral component is added in. And that is a mystical use of behavior by Indian spirituality. And lastly, uh, it is also used for certain dances, of which
Hmm.
Gurdjieff made a very liberal use in later years. So it is to use certain mudras, nyasas, or
Hmm.
dances in order to bring about change not only in thoughts and feelings, but also in the energy body and also at the level of the karmic endowment. So Indian spirituality uses this in a variety of ways. The whole element of behavior, starting from something as vanilla as an exercise or postures, and going into a full psychodrama kind of a setting, which involves the paranormal.
Right. That's I think quite interesting topic in itself.
Yeah.
Somewhere we do touch that also with you. When we talk about the Trinity, it brings in different schools of psychology all by itself. So, how does holistic healing look at behavior for healing?
Holistic healing, one thing it does is, in the West, it tries to bring together thought, affect, and behavior all for the purpose of self-development or healing. That's the first thing holistic healing does in the West. In the East, holistic healing brings together not only thought, affect, and behavior, but also the energy and karma. So instead of the Holy Trinity, you have the famous five. And then
Right.
those who are believers in the East, they add two more elements of soul and God. So it becomes famous seven. So that is the way holistic healing takes shape in the East and in the West, and sorry, in the East and West. And in the East, you have two large groups: the group of believers in soul and God, and the other group which is atheistic in its approach. So in the atheistic group, you will have largely the approaches of Buddha and Mahavir, which are the atheistic schools in the Indian canvas. And otherwise, you have the theistic schools. So in the theistic schools, we'll be looking at famous seven. In the atheistic schools, we'll be looking at famous five. And in the West, we'll be looking at the Trinity, the famous three. The way it uses holistic healing uses is, one, it uses psychodrama. Two, it uses the dances which are not used pervasively now, except for those who are interested in Gurdjieff. They still use very complicated dances for self-development as well as for healing.
I think movement therapy people, they
Yeah.
touch those zones to a certain extent from Western school point.
True. So movement therapy does it to some limited extent, and even more limited extent is to use body and certain exercises like in Tai Chi or in dynamic rolfing, where you use body and the movements of the body for making an impact on affect or thought. Then holistic healing
Natyam and Natyam and this Abhinayam also in Indian classical dance forms, they also concentrate more on this.
Yes, yes. The only difference is that they are very good for self-development, but they are not really geared for pathology. So if you want to use them for pathology, you really will have to customize them. That they can give you generic knowledge of which part of the body, which chakra this particular movement is impacting. And then you will have to figure out in which pathology, which chakra is at play in what way. And this kind of a ready-made package is not available, which tells you that for this particular problem of DSM, this is the holistic solution.
Right.
So that is one aspect of it. The holistic healing also uses a lot of psychodrama, Eastern practices, group therapy practices. And these are very powerful behavioral group therapy practices which lead you from behavior to affect and thought. You can look at many of the group practices of group meditations of Osho or group meditations of many secret schools in the, not only secret schools, many schools in the East. You can look at Buddhist schools, you can look at Tantra schools, and the way they use the group practices, behavioral group practices, it's a form of a behavioral group behavioral therapy, sprinkled with mysticism and spirituality and occult to bring about a change in the thought and behavior, in the thought and affect. And you also have issues like tools like acupressure, acupuncture, homeopathy, dances, music, which from various aspects are used to bring about a change in behavior. And some of them can be used to have behavior be a channel for bringing about change in thought and affect. So this is a very kind of uh, wide canvas of tools in the holistic healing which are available, which we can use. And the tools of the Indian spirituality using idol therapy, visualization, uh, the whole process of preparing for yajna and doing it, the shamanic practices, all these tools holistic healing uses based upon what the person is likely to respond to, and whether
Right.
the goal is of psychological healing or of self-development.
So when we see such diverse forms of schools applying here behaviorism, how do you see evolution going forward in using behavior for healing?
First, I see in future, in near future, very near future,
Mm-hmm.
the silos breaking down and the three coming together: thought, affect, and behavior.
Uh-huh.
The second is getting added to that the aspect of energy, karma. Maybe soul and God may not get added very soon, but at least energy and karma can easily get added into that uh, zone. The second part is how do we have standardized packages in the behavioral aspects, which are congruent to what we have found in the thought schools or the affect schools. For example, imagine there is a behavioral therapy center and it has standardized packages to work on the paranoid schizoid split. The package includes two different psychodramas, two different behavioral exercises, two different visits to certain places, maybe one or two dance forms, or maybe one or two social work formats.
Okay.
Another package can be related to the rage towards the parents. The third package, say for the Oedipus. The fourth package for object loss. Now, these issues are very, very widespread issues. So if we look at all the entire DSM, if we just take together object loss, the split open, the Oedipus, and formation of a unhealthy self, and rage towards the parents and consequent guilt, this five itself will explain almost 50% of the DSM. So
Right.
why not have standardized behavioral packages for them? Third,
Quite a work.
yeah. And I think if we start, somebody will specialize. If you, for example, let us say you specialize in creating psychodramas for Oedipus and just these two things. This, once you practice it once or twice, you will evolve, you will learn from the experiences. And by the time you are doing fifth or seventh group, you will have very refined products with you. And they will be highly efficient. So the simplicity, the concreteness, the dialogues that you use, the settings that you create, and you can figure out what is working best. So over a period of time, you can specialize, let us say, in creating psychodramas only on Oedipus or only on the split.
Okay.
And I would suggest if you are trying to do this, just take up three subjects: object loss, split, and Oedipus.
All right.
This will cover almost 30-40% of the whole population. I mean, the clientele you are trying to cater to.
Right, right.
And there needs some specialization and creativity focused on this. The third element that I look at is how do you use virtual reality for a virtual psychodrama or
Okay.
a virtual behavioral experience? Because technology now permits us to do far more sophisticated behavioral interventions than before. What could not be designed
Right.
can now be designed in the techno world. So if I want to create a
Right. Right.
psychodrama or a behavioral experience where you have to face your father, you don't have to create a psychodrama where somebody puts on a mask and appears like your father. You can actually create a techno person inside, put your father's picture inside, and create a techno person inside, and in the virtual reality have a almost real kind of a experience. So,
That's something like in gaming zones these days when
yeah,
they talk about aggression and different social issues. I
yeah.
think these things are not directed towards this perspective and goal, but yes, in a hidden disguised way they are doing so. So
So
yes, that can be done.
healing experiences in the virtual reality world, that is a very
Okay.
big area that we have to look at, and in that we will have to redefine behavior in the virtual
Mm,
reality context.
true.
And that will expand the whole arsenal or the armor that we have, the tools that we have for healing and
Mm,
also for self development.
right. Right.
And lastly, I see a lot of spiritual practices which involve behavior as the significant component
Mm.
getting into the mainstream of psychotherapy and of the self development movement.
That's quite interesting. And as you talked about the future acknowledgement of behavioral aspect of the Trinity, that's sounds very very profound. How that would be applied. So today, when we talked about behaviorism, different schools have thought of it in different way. Either it can be instinct driven or morality driven, or we can see it's like cognitive congruence of actions and behavior, or we see with the perspective of punishment to rewards, or we say preach what you practice with in regard of spirituality. We came across different definitions and applications today. Thank you so much, Mr. Vedya, for sharing your precious time and knowledge with us. So, we have discussed today behavior in the context of healing and spirituality. In coming episodes, we will discuss equally interesting topics. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.